Our guest, Victoria Gross, was introduced to the world of spirit through the Spiritualist Church in 1984. She began an avid study of tarot, palmistry, psychometry, energy work, and psychic development. By 1987, she was doing psychic readings for the public. In 2001, she formed the North County Tarot Society, where people could gather for workshops and hear guest speakers talk about tarot. In 2002, she attended the Arthur Findlay College of Mediumship in Stansted, England, to further her education in the psychic arts. Victoria's psychic interest led her to paranormal investigation, where in 2009 to 2010, she was the lead story producer for the BioChannel specials and the first season of My Ghost Story. She's currently working as lead story producer for 2 pilot shows called Case Files Unknown and Case Files UFO, and she's in the process of writing a new book called Psychic Skills for Everyday Living, also published by Schiffer. For more information on Victoria, you can visit her Facebook page, Victoria Gross, and I want to welcome you, Victoria. How are you?
Hey, Brenda. Thank you for having me back. It's good to be on your show. How are you?
Oh, I'm good, and we're thrilled to have you because we're going to be talking about a fascinating subject as what was one of my very first loves in the psychic arts, and that's palmistry.
Oh, I know. I'm so excited about tonight's talk. And actually, it was you that introduced me to palmistry and encouraged me to study it back in the early 90s.
And you really ran with it. I believe you put together
a
workbook,
And like you said,
you?
it was your first love. There's something about it that that is a love. And it's just like with anything else that we study, like with the tarot or a lot of the other arts of divination, it's endless what we can learn. And that's not to discourage anybody, but it's just to encourage them that we don't know everything all the time, and it's just something that we can keep learning as we grow and we progress in our lives.
And so, why do you think people are fascinated by palmistry? Because they could take it with them, or they can always look at their palm, or what has your reactions been when you read people's palms and stuff? They really want to know, don't they?
They really do. People love to have their palms read. You know what? Because it's just connected to them. It's a part of them. I mean, the palm, our hands are like the books of our lives, and everything is written in them, past, present, and probable future. And the lines change as we change because they're the end of the nerve endings from the brain. And people are always fascinated, and as you know, the first 2 questions that people ask, is will I get married, or when will I get married, and how many children will I have? People always want to know those 2 things up front. But we find out so much more in the hands because we not only look at the lines. I mean, the lines are a major part, but that's not the only part. We look at the shape of the hands, the texture, the nails, the fingers, the length, the size, the coloring, and, the markings on the hand. They tell us a whole myriad of things. And I think for the fact that people can have it done right there, like say if they're at a party or, like say the Renaissance Fair or even a private reading, they take their hands with them, and they're always studying their hands after that. They're always looking at their hands. So it's very intriguing for people, whereas if they get a card reading or, I also do the crystal ball like how you do, they walk away, they don't have that with them.
Yeah, then that's really true too. And I have found, like when I was single before I met my husband, and some guy you're dating finds out that you're a psychic, the first thing they do is stick out their hand. Have you noticed that?
Well, it's true. People do that. That's why for years I really stopped telling I was a palmist for that reason. You almost get smacked in the face because the palm, their hand just comes right up to your face. So I would always, say I do everything else, and then, if they're interested in reading, I give them my card and it'd have palmistry on it. But you have to be really careful, or stand back when you talk to a person and tell them you're a palmist.
You can get hit in the forehead pretty much, huh?
I know.
Sure, okay, well then tell me something about myself, It's so funny.
It is.
So, what are some of the first clues to a person's personality that are revealed in a palm?
Well, when we do a palm reading, what I do, and what most palms do, is we're going to look at the hands, the shape of the hands, because there's different shapes, and that will give us an idea. And again, for every positive in the hand, there's a negative, and we can't just take one aspect of the hand and say that's a person's personality or characteristic. I mean, that's having enough information to be dangerous. We have to, so let me back up before we even read the hands, is we have to look at the hands, both hands, as a book, and to read both hands as a book and to read them in a total essence. So the different categories of hands, there's 6 main categories of hands. There's a square hand, a spatulate. A square hand is more of like an earth hand. That would be somebody that's working with their hands a lot. A person with a spatulate hand, and again, just think of a spatula that you use to flip pancakes. It's that kind of shape. That would be a person that would be more adventurous. A person with a conic hand, they may be more thick at the base and thinner at the top of the fingers. Those are people that are in the arts and entertainments. A philosophic hand would be very long and narrow with probably knotty fingers. You know, that person is thinking a lot. A psychic hand is very soft and narrow and very pointed, very, the energy goes through very easily. And then an elemental hand, which you really would not see very much, that would be a very base hand, and that person is very materialistic and, let's say, brutal. But let me back up. Again, we're not going to draw somebody's personality out of the shape of their hands, and nobody has a pure hand. So the 7th category that we have is a mixed hand. So we'll find different mixtures, like, say, maybe in the psychic hand you'll find conic fingers or a spatulate fingernail on one finger and not the rest. So everything is a mixture. So the first thing we do is we take a look at that hand and evaluate what type of hand it is, what's the predominant category that it's in, and again, definitely most people would be mixed. And then you read the fingers, the shape, the length of the palm, the length of the fingers, the shape of the fingers, the fingernails, which is hard because a lot of women have acrylic nails, so that's, you know, kind of out the door there. And then we go for the lines, because the lines will show the energies, where the shape and the coloring and the fingers will show more of the personality of the characteristics. There are 2 schools of thought. Some people teach that you read the left hand as what you've come into and the right hand as the present and future, what you're doing with the potentials of that left hand. There's another school of thought that says, you know, read the dominant hand as the present and future and the non-dominant hand as the past. I take to that school of thought, being left-handed. I have found that to be, in my years of reading hands, I found that has worked for me, and that's the school of thought I take. But again, since we're reading both hands as a book, I don't think it really makes a difference, because we're going to interject our psychic ability also into this to get that accurate information.
And, you know, that's really, I'm glad you brought that up, because as a palm reader myself, you know, when I read a palm, since I've been doing it for a number of years, you know, you pick up on so much. It's not even only the visual. You sometimes look into those lines and you see patterns, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly. And I think a lot of times for a lot of us that have been reading for so many years, and we're reading also on a psychic level, sometimes I know for me I have to go back through my books, because I'm like, you know, you're reading more on a psychic level, where like the palm and the cards, anything, because I'm a visual person and I'm a Taurus, I like tactical things. I want to touch something. You know, they're a starting point for me. But as you know, we both have talked about this before. We believe in education of any of the arts of divination, and I know both of us have endless amount of books. We have great libraries of books, and we've taken a lot of classes. We've taught a lot of classes. So there's so much, not only that we want to have that foundation, but we do read into it on a psychic level.
We do, because I don't think that we can. I don't think we can help. We can help it at some point, especially if you touch the palm. You know, certain impressions will come to you at that point too. Now, you had mentioned a couple different schools of thought, and you know, years ago I was working. Remember the Whole Life Expos that we used to have? Those Whole Life Expos, and there was a palmist there, and he was of gypsy descent, and he read palms differently than anybody that I ever knew. And I don't know if you've ever come across this, but he did his approach to palm reading was very astrological.
A lot is. I mean, and you look at the palm itself is divided up into astrological signs, or, you know, there's the plane of Venus and the plane of Mars, and then we have the index fingers Jupiter, and the middle finger is Saturn. So there is a lot of astrological influence into this, and I know a lot that the gypsies do this. And you know, because palmistry is so ancient, I mean, we think it started in India and went to China and all different countries. I mean, there are different schools. I mean, Indian palmistry is different than what we know as Western. So I think it's wonderful that there are all these different schools. And for me, I've looked into them a little bit, but it's enough just to do the Western palmistry. But I think we need to realize that there are different schools, and if we're prescribing to that school, we work into that, we stay with that framework, and we get our information. And yeah, there is a lot of astrology. I think it's wonderful. One of the
fingers, the like the fingers have 3 sections, and each one is astrological. And yeah, it was pretty interesting the way he did it, and I'd have to say it was different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So. So now, do you ever come up with, and I don't know, this is something probably for advanced work, after you've been reading palms for a long time, you see an awful lot of things that probably aren't in the palmistry books, but you notice, and it always seems to be something that if you see it, it holds true to every other palm that you see it, like some kind of mark or like a shape. Has that ever happened to you?
Well, yeah, and I have seen things that, I can't find in palmistry books. And you do see things that aren't listed, yes.
And people are always asking you, they always want to know about their lifeline. What are the major lines in the palm? I know that our listeners want to know if they're looking at, because you know what, I guarantee they're looking at their palms right now.
Well, it's funny because right before you called, I was looking at mine. I'm like, I haven't really looked at mine with a magnifying glass for a while. And, I've spent the last 15 minutes, and it's just so intriguing. I was so intrigued by my own palms. But when we talk about the major lines, the first thing, besides the marriage and children, which I'll talk about, because those are not major lines, but, people do want to know about that, is... And you probably have had this happen. People, they show you their palm. It's like, how long am I going to live?
Oh, I know. And it's like, they're looking at their lifeline in a totally different way. So how do you handle that?
Well, I just say, well, eventually you probably will die. I don't know when, but, I'm sure one day it will happen. The lifeline just shows the vitality of the person. And I've seen very elderly people with short lifelines. It has nothing to do with how long we're going to live. It shows the vitality. If the lifeline is really hugging close to the thumb, it shows the person is more introverted. If it's kind of way arching out, they're a little bit more extroverted. There could be breaks in the lifeline that overlap and one goes out further. That means that maybe at that age in that person's life they'll be more extroverted, or if it goes in, more introverted. So the lifeline just really shows the vitality of the person. The headline is, we can find, that's the line that's in the center of the palm, and it can go straight across or down. If it, straight across, it's a person that's very mental. I mean, he's just on that mental level, because the headline's just going to show us where we're at, mentality. If we're more intuitive, if it goes down, if it slants down, how far does it slant down? Does it slant down to the Mount of Luna, which is opposite? It's on the outside of your hand, let's say, the percussion side of the hand.
Like the pad on the...
Yeah,
that's below the pad below
at the base.
Little finger, yeah.
Yeah.
The bottom.
So, it goes down. That's more of an intuitive person. So, how long, is it a long headline or short? If it's a short headline, then they are probably don't have that long of a attention span. They're very quick in their judgments. And that's not saying that it's bad. It's just that, there are people that they're quick in their judgments and they want to go there. They're not going to think something out. But again, for every positive in the hand, there's a negative and vice versa. So you have to look at other aspects in the hand that may balance that out. The heart line is what people really, the love line, the heart line.
They all want to know about that. Oh, definitely.
Yeah, that's the line that's closest to the base of the fingers. Now, there's also two schools of this in Western palmistry, that some read it, that it starts at the base of the index finger, and some read that it starts at the side of the hand, or like, let's say, under the little finger. I read it, the way that I was taught was that it starts under the little finger, but many books will show differently. So,
you see, again, I read it the opposite way.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
And you talked a little bit about the simian crease, that you talked about the headline that goes completely straight across. Those are pretty rare, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, especially if you find the simian line where the headline and heart line are together and they go straight across, they're very rare. And it has, been said that they're usually found on Down syndrome children or adults, but I have seen them on adults that were not Down syndrome.
Oh, me too. I have a client.
It's
a man. He has two, both hands.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that's a good point. That the lines are going to be different on both hands, except that sometimes in that situation.
It was and then I've seen it also when there's only one on one hand and not on the other. So it is pretty interesting. I mean, because everybody's palm, there is no two palms like fingerprints. There are no two palms alike.
Exactly, and so that's the fascinating thing. I think palmistry is hard sometimes to study because you need a lot of hands to study it. I'm not discouraging anybody from studying it, but it's not like tarot where you can practice by yourself a lot. So this is where, I've always had great family and friends that in the beginning it's like, oh, let me look at your palm, and the more palms that you can look at, you can educate yourself. I mean, it's fascinating. It's just endless, all the different types of markings and lines and hands, and it's just it leaves me speechless sometimes because, as you know, I mean, we've been reading for 25 plus years, and we've read a lot of hands, and I've collected Xerox copies of hands through the years, and it always fascinates me. And then to try to put it with their sign, and
and that brings me to my next question. Have you noticed? I know I have. And is there distinct hands or hand types that go along with astrological signs?
Well, I think there are, like the philosophical hands, I would say, are more with the air signs.
The long, thin hands.
Or even psychic hands could be more into that category. And then with the earth signs, I think we see more of the thicker hands, the practical hands. But I think a lot of it has to do with not only the sun sign, but the moon sign. Because, I'm a Taurus, I'm an earth sign, but I don't have earth hands. So it's kind of fascinating. But there are, like the spatulate hand would go along with the fire signs. So sometimes we do see that.
I think it's interesting a lot of times because it's not only the hand reading, because the hands and the palms are the most predominant, but there's also, we had a guest on that read feet. Feet have lines too. And face reading and, there's all these different modalities of reading. Of course, the palms are the most fascinating. And have you noticed that one palm has usually more lines than the other one?
A lot of times, yes. Yeah. And I look at that then, which one am I reading as the past? So if a person is right-handed, I'm going to read their left hand as the past. And that really shows you, let's say, the progress of the person, because a person who has a lot of those little fine lines in the hands, we call them spider lines and influence lines. A lot of times, that's can be a very highly creative person. That's the positive of that. The negative of that is that person is usually going through a very anxiety time, burning the candle at both ends and in the middle. There's a lot of energy being dispersed, not focused. And say, if I read a hand, the person's right-handed, and I see in his left hand that's what his hand looks like, but in his right hand there's fewer lines, I know that person's pretty much cleaned up their life, that they're getting more focused, they're getting more directed. So we can look at our hands and see emotionally what's going on with us, where we're at.
And so the dominant hand, let me get this. So the dominant hand, this is the way so the dominant hand is what is happening now. The left hand, or the non-dominant hand, depending on how you read it, because you're left-handed, is what will be or what has happened in the past, or the possibilities and the potential.
Well, yeah, that's how I read, but there's another school of thought that just says the left is, because our left side is really what we're receiving from the universe.
It's the receiving hand is right.
Yeah, yes. So how do you read? How do you?
I read the right hand or the dominant hand, depending, because the right hand, if they're right-handed, then the right hand would be, because it's the dominant hand, is what's happening now in their life. It's a reflection of what's happening now. The left hand or the non-dominant hand is what will be, what the potential, the possibilities, things from the past, and things like that. That's how I read it.
So if the person's left-handed, you would read that as the now, then, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so we read it the same way. Yeah.
Yes. And so now this is a question that I know a lot of people are going to want to know, because there are certain lines in the palm, when you mentioned them, the heart line, the head line, and the life line. Those are the three biggies, right? You'd have to say that those are the three biggies that everybody's interested in. But I always get this question, well, are they going to change? Are these lines going to change? What will happen with these lines? What is your thought on that?
I think they do change. I've seen them change through the years in my own hands and in my clients. And, depending on what's going on with us, so sometimes I've seen them grow longer. Sometimes they seem shorter. I've seen markings appear or disappear. And remember, the amount of, the deeper the line, the amount of life force that is in that line. So if a line is really shallow, there's not a whole life force in there. So I think a lot of it depends on the person. Sometimes I don't think we're going to see extreme changes, but I do think we'll see gradual changes. And I do believe that the lines change in our hands as we change. Again, they're the nerve endings to the brain. And so depending on what we're going through, we'll have a lot of lines or not. Or,
now, what about the fate line that comes up from the bottom of the palm?
The what line?
The fate line. Fate comes up next to the lifeline, but comes up through the bottom, from the bottom of the palm, the fate line. Sometimes people have it, some people don't. You ever read that line?
Yeah, and you're right. Sometimes people have them, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they start in the middle of the palm and go up, or sometimes they stop. So it really, or they'll go up and then they'll shift, and then they'll go up again. So, yeah, and they can start anywhere on the palm, as you know. I mean, they can start in the center, start on the edge. Yeah. That's another line that's, some people call it a major line, some people don't. I think the major lines are the 3 lines, and then the fate line does appear in some palms. It doesn't always. At the health line, that line under that can appear at the bottom of the palm going up to the little finger. I mean, that's a misnomer, because if you don't have a health line, it means you're healthier. If you have a health line, it shows you don't have, something's going on with your health.
Well, that's interesting. I've never really even delved into that one. And that's a line underneath the little underneath the finger of Mars, which is the little finger, right?
The little finger, and you it goes down into it can go anywhere on the palm, the little finger. So
interesting. I never read that line, and I've been reading palms for a long, long time, and I never really read. So, because it's like it's one of these things like astrology. Wouldn't you say that you could just keep studying and studying and studying and
Oh my gosh, yes.
It's endless.
It's endless, and I don't read every line on the hand. And you know what? I did not read children lines, because the marriage lines and the children lines is where people, I think, can really get themselves into trouble. The marriage lines, now we call them relationship lines. People live together. People, I've seen people married that don't even have them. It's the emotion that's in it. And just because, and that's usually on the side of the hand under the little finger. And
exactly.
And just somebody may have 2 or 3. That doesn't mean they're going to have 2 or 3 marriages. So I think people, that can be really misleading in children lines. I will not read children's in the hands. When people ask me, how many children am I going to have? I always say, well, how many do you want? You decide. How many do you want?
Oh, you know what? I just jump in and tell them. I don't care.
Well, you know what? Because because children could be not even their children. It could be maybe their adopted children.
It could be adopted children, but they're children. That's just that's your own preference. That really is.
It is.
But I agree with the whole relationship thing, because when I read it, I tell them that the palm shows a bonding. It doesn't necessarily mean a marriage, but it does mean an emotional bonding.
Yeah, and I love that, and that's what it is. It is a bonding. It doesn't mean it's a legal marriage. It's an emotional marriage, and that's what I said. I've seen people married that didn't even have a marriage line. So how much emotional bonding was there? But that's a good way of putting it.
Well, and that is when you said that you've seen people married that don't even have a marriage line. It's almost like when people see an astrological chart and they go, oh my God, I've got nothing in the relationship house. That doesn't mean that they'll never have any relationship. It could possibly mean that they have to work harder in that area.
Right. That's a very good point.
So tell us about the wrists and the bracelets, and what is a bracelet?
Well, you know what? That's the part that I really don't know. I don't read that much. I think you could probably tell them more than that because I never really read that. Like how like you were saying, you don't read some lines in the hands. I really don't pay that much attention to them.
I think that's where they show the age. They talk a lot about, how long a person's going to live by the bracelets, and the bracelets are the lines that encircle the wrists below the palm.
Right.
And the more you have, the longer you live, that type of thing. And you have to just kind of bend your hand over to see how many you have. So.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that when I look at it, people ask me about that. And each little thing, is supposed to be 20 years. Yeah.
Wow.
If you bend the palm down and you see how many times that it creases, each little section is 20 years.
Interesting. I mean, I've studied it, of course. Like you said, there's so much to study, and there is the one thing there's so much to remember. And I think as palmists, those were never my favorite lines. So I've read them, and of course they were in my book. But when I used to teach, I had a course book, and of course I used to teach that. But personally, if I don't use it every day, I'm not going to remember it. So that's cool. Yeah. I also heard too that if on that top one, if it goes up, if it arches a lot, that means that a woman that she would have difficulty with childbirth. So I don't know. I don't have children. Mine goes up, but I never had children, so I don't know if that's true or not. But it's interesting.
That is interesting. Mine goes up. I have one child, but I had a drama, but I didn't have difficulty. I think most people have a drama. Most people have a drama around the time of their birth. And we're going to pause.
May have been the guy who wrote that.
Pardon me? What? You remember
may have been
my
the guy
drama.
Who wrote that.
We're going to pause for a commercial, Victoria, and we'll come right back, okay?
Perfect.
A new era in psychic services has begun. PsychicAccess.com. You can connect with our psychic advisors by telephone or chat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All of our psychic advisors are interviewed, fully verified, and accuracy tested, assuring you quality service. We're living in some very troubled times right now. More and more, the world's problems are affecting us on a personal level. You don't have to deal with this alone. Our highly accurate psychics, caring advisors, and talented mediums can help with situations you are currently experiencing and can let you know what the future may hold for you. All new customers get a free 6-minute reading. All you have to do is register. Why not visit us now and get a free reading at PsychicAccess.com.
Okay, we're back with Victoria Gross, and when we had our little break, we touched on a subject that we're actually going to talk about next, and that has to do with fingerprints and the whorls on the fingers. So, Victoria, tell us a little bit about the fingerprints themselves and what's called the whorls, WHORLS on the fingers.
I was going to say you probably would do better than that because when it came to the fingerprints, which we do study in advanced palmistry, I could never get it. I could never get it down. You know how you just have those subjects that it's fascinating and I love it, but I could not teach it. So I think you would do better with that.
I wonder, I'm sure there is a whole study on just the fingerprints and just the way that they, are, what the whorls look like, and there's a philosophy behind it. And if you look at your own, and it can vary from finger to finger. Some have very circular patterns and some have wavy patterns. And the really circular that are really tight and circles, like that go in a circular pattern, those are people who are very concerned about being able to control things in their lives. If you have more wavy and peaked, you're more outgoing, more adventurous. And then it even, depending on the finger and what astrological finger that is, you can even add it into that as an added amount of information onto the finger itself. Just like thumbs.
Yeah.
Have you noticed the thumbs? Thumbs are interesting too. When you look at the fingers, what are some of your favorite kind of thumbs?
Well, the thumb is very interesting, and I think there's one school of Chinese palmistry that's basically all they study. Because the thumb, the top part of the thumb, let's say from that center joint to the tip of the nail, the tip of the thumb is the will section, and from the middle joint to, let's say, the base of the thumb is the logic, and then you have the Mount of Venus, that's that big pad under the thumb. The thumb is very interesting because you can tell a lot about, a person's will and their logic and, their diplomacy, if they have a wasted thumb. And, when you're getting back to the fingerprints, and there's so many good books, like the Bingham Book of Palmistry, the Criminal Tendency of Palmistry. There's a lot of good books that do talk about the fingerprints. And like you said, it does get a little bit more advanced. And I love the fingerprints, but I've never really taught them, and I go over them lightly in advanced classes because they can get complex. But it's interesting to find out what fingerprint is on that thumb, what that thumbprint is, and how you can take those qualities with the will and the logic of the person. And if a person has a thumb that, you take your index finger and press the pad of your thumb, that top section, and does it come back? Is it flat? Is that person's thumb bending back? That signifies that they let money roll out of their hands. And
that's my thumb. Okay, you're talking about my thumb. Mine is curved. I always call it my hitchhiking thumb to the mall. Take me to the because I don't go to the mall. Well, I go shopping. Okay.
Yeah. Money just kind of goes right off that thumb tip.
Oh, that's bad. I don't want my thumb. I want a different one.
Well, you hold it up straight. And then there's when you read in the books, they talk about the murderous thumb, which is the club thumb, the big bulbous thumb. But I've had students in my classes that were not murderers, and they were very spiritual people that had those. So I don't think we can just look at something in a book and say, oh, okay, that's it. We have to take everything into consideration. But the thumb, I look at my thumb, and like, okay, how's my will? Is it flat? Have I let people walk over me? Or, am I extending my will too much? Am I being too domineering over people? Where exactly... is it more than my logic? Is it, what's going on here? So it's
now, are you talking about the size of the sections as compared to each other, like the top part and the bottom part?
Right, and then we look at we measure the thumb. The thumb in itself is a whole complete chapter. We could say that about the fingers, but the fingers we can really group into like one, area, but the thumb is really its own complete chapter.
Well, it's interesting because the ancient Egyptians, and I believe that palmistry, well, I know for a fact that palmistry was practiced in ancient Egypt, but in all the paintings, they always have, like in the drawings, they always have the thumb out first. Because I believe that thumb, because it's the opposing thumb, is what separated them as human beings than the animals. So they were pretty fascinated by the thumb too, and they always showed a thumb that was pretty equal in size, like from one section to the other, equal and curved.
Wow.
Yeah, and all the Egyptian carvings, it's pretty interesting. You always see the same kind of thumb, and it's always the hand is extended out, thumb first. So
well,
I thought that was
very interesting. And like you said, in Chinese, there's a certain school of Chinese palmistry that's all they study, because the thumb is the will. It is a lot of people, that's the personality, the persona, let's say. So it's very interesting in the Egyptian paintings that they have that out first.
Yeah, they because in their the hand to them, it was the four elements, and the thumb was the, like, what you would consider the will or the spirit or the life force or the hika.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So if we talk about schools of palmistry, you're mentioning the Chinese school of palmistry. I bet that's completely fascinating. I bet that book's probably like 6 inches thick.
Yeah, and I can just look at things like with the Chinese or with the Indian and just glance over those books. And I don't have any. I mean, I've seen things, but it can get really complicated studying this school and this school and this school and this school. So I always just told my students, if you're going to study, Indian palmistry, just stick with that one then, because it can get too confusing, But there's a lot of things that do blend over into each school.
Well, it would have to. They would definitely would have to, because I think that divination, like palmistry and the tarot, they crossed continents. Yes, with people who were travelers, gypsies or merchants or whatever. And what is different about Indian palmistry? Now I'm curious about that, because I don't know much about Indian palmistry. Because I know Indian astrology, the Vedic astrology, is different.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't really know a whole heck. I mean, but what they call like their lifeline, like our lifeline would be called their father line, or what we call our headline, they call the mother line, So it's just different wording and things. And again, I don't know enough about it to really say exactly what it is. Just, I read it from time to time, and then I kind of put it away in my mind. But I just think it's very interesting, all the different types of school. And like you said, there are going to be crossovers. I mean, look at the example that you just gave with the Egyptian paintings. I mean, all these things do cross over, all kinds of divination. There are similarities, but then there are little different ways of looking at it, just like religions, like everything.
But when it really boils down to it, if you think about it, all of this stuff and everything that's in the palm, even though it's complex, they're all based on universal truths. Wouldn't you agree?
Correct. Yes, I would.
I mean, the planets, the elements, those things in nature that cannot be denied, that just are.
Right.
It's definitely not a man-made practice in the sense where it's just made up. It's something that relates to humanity.
Well, and I think, personally, we find that information more in older books. I think that's one of the areas that we need to really be cautious in this day and age. There's so many good books out there, and we have great libraries of books, but I think I've seen a lot of people take things and just want to put their twist on it just to make it different. And that's why I really like going back to the older books. And when I write something, I use old books as my reference, because I think they've stayed more with the laws that were tried and true, and like you said, the universal laws. I mean, look at, the astrology and the elements, they're all in the hands. So all those things come into being, they're all connected. I don't know if you found that.
Pardon me, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I don't know if you found that, that's one of the areas I think we need to be really cautious today, is getting information that's tweaked just because somebody wants to put their own
spin on it.
Yeah.
I think that's all the way across the board in all metaphysical studies. And, I don't want to sound like, a snob when it comes to being a psychic or an intuitive thing, but I think in order for you to be somebody who's out in the public and you're helping people through your divination arts and your talents as a psychic, you better know your stuff, which means you can't just make it up on the fly. It has to be something, you have to study it. Yeah, it has to be a life study for you. Otherwise, you cannot be an authority on it. Do you know?
Exactly. True.
And that, I'm with you on that. I get pretty angry, when it comes to that. Even when it comes to like the spiritual practices and stuff, and somebody runs off and say, "Well, I'm so and so, a wizard or whatever." I'm like, you know what? Get out of here.
Yeah.
Get out of here. So anyhow, in what way have you seen palm readings help people? Your clients, in specific.
I think it gives them a really good understanding of what's going on in their life, in their mind, because it's the subconscious that we're looking at in the hand here. And again, I think, because I read, like you, we read psychically also, I'm going to pick up things that are not markings in the hand. I may say something that isn't really shown in the hand. I'm just picking up psychically, but the line or that marking will give me an indication. So I think it gives people a better understanding of oh, okay, this is really kind of what's going on, or this is why I like that. Maybe, I remember one time I was doing a big party. It was like for a corporation, and it was a Christmas party, and it was like 500 people, and it's for accountants, and it's like it's like after reading so many hands for hours, they all had their headline going down into their intuition. And then they're wondering why they were unhappy in their job. It's like, well, maybe think about that. If you're going to be an accountant, you want to use your intuition here, So I think it gives people a good, just a good little mirror to look at themselves, look at, hey, maybe I'm more of a creative, intuitive person, and I need to be in that kind of job that I can really excel at that. Maybe I'm more of a mathematician. I need to be at this kind of job. And there's so many books out, careers, hands, and romance and hands, and health and hands. So I think it gives us just a little indication of, hey, what's going on.
Well, it's definitely better than therapy, because then you can understand yourself, right?
Exactly.
And then you take it with you. Go around and you take it with you. And like you were saying, for every positive, there's a negative. And it's always been my philosophy that, even with an astrological, chart, because nothing's perfect. You're not going to have the most perfect palm. Right. You're not going to have the most perfect astrological chart. It just doesn't exist. It's going to be positive and negative. And so I suppose it's up to us to emphasize the positive and de-emphasize the negative.
Right. I think that's a really good point. It's just like, these are your potentials. How can you access them, and what can you do with them? We're aware of the negatives, and too often we give too much power to that. It's like, okay, this is the weakness, that's fine, but look at your potential. Now, how can you manifest this potential into your life? How can you bring this to be bigger in your life? And you're right. I think with any reading, both you and I are not pansy readers. We just say it like it is, But we give people the tools to say, okay, how can you make this work in your life? If this isn't a good point in your life, okay, look at this. You have signs in your hands that says you have a writer's fork. Are you writing? Can you write your story? That will help you shift through something. So I think that's how it helps people, is to give them an idea. Hey, I do have a writer's fork. Oh, that's what I like. That's why I like writing. And, maybe they will go. Maybe they have a teacher square on their hand, and which is on the amount of Jupiter, and they're like, hey, I'm in the wrong profession. Maybe I should be teaching. That doesn't mean they have to teach, a traditional school, but maybe they can teach art class or something, at a community center. So when people see their potentials, they can see how they can fulfill them, and then they're happier in life. So I think it really is a good tool. It's like therapy in a palm.
Therapy in the palm is, I think, it's unfortunate that, It's not something that therapists use. It would really help people, for them to really know, look, this is really who you are. Are you going to reach this potential? You going to stall on it, because it's all there. They always have the saying, the future is in your palm. Well, it really is.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? I with you. It's. I would like to see it more mainstream, used in therapy, used in corporations. I have a wonderful book called Criminal Tendency and Palmistry. You can,
tell us about that.
You could pretty much tell what kind of crime a person would, take. Somebody who's doing more of a mental, they're really going to think this crime out, would probably have more of a mental hand than, an earth hand or something. So, I don't want people to look at their hand and go, okay, I can commit this kind of crime, or, but it's pretty interesting. It's an old book. It's just written by a woman named Rhoda. It's called Criminal
I'm just going to have to look that one up. Well, you know what?
Yeah.
I could talk to you for hours, Victoria, but we have reached the end of our interview, and I want to thank you for being with us.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on again. I always enjoy our talks and our shows, and thanks for, the subject. And thank you for introducing me to palmistry all those years ago.
Oh, you know what? I didn't know I really hadn't realized that I was the one introducing it to you, but I'm totally flattered. And so thank you very much. And you have a great rest of the week, and I'll catch up with you later. Thank you.
You too. Have a wonderful show. Thanks, Brenda. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello, my name is Res Miranda. If you're having relationship, career, or life issues, I'm inviting you to experience what it's like to have access to professional, highly accurate psychics and spiritual advisors you can trust to care and help you. Register now to get your free 6-minute reading by telephone or chat. Get answers, get access, psychic access, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. PsychicAccess.com.
Our guest, Victoria Gross, was introduced to the world of spirit through the Spiritualist Church in 1984. She began an avid study of tarot, palmistry, psychometry, energy work, and psychic development. By 1987, she was doing psychic readings for the public. In 2001, she formed the North County Tarot Society, where people could gather for workshops and hear guest speakers talk about tarot. In 2002, she attended the Arthur Findlay College of Mediumship in Stansted, England, to further her education in the psychic arts. Victoria's psychic interest led her to paranormal investigation, where in 2009 to 2010, she was the lead story producer for the BioChannel specials and the first season of My Ghost Story. She's currently working as a lead story producer for 2 pilot shows called Case Files Unknown and Case Files UFO, and she's in the process of writing a new book called Psychic Skills for Everyday Living, also published by Schiffer. For more information on Victoria, you can visit her Facebook page, Victoria Gross, and I want to welcome you, Victoria. How are you?
Hey, Brenda. Thank you for having me back. It's good to be on your show. How are you?
Oh, I'm good, and we're thrilled to have you because we're going to be talking about a fascinating subject as what was one of my very first
readings from the brain. And people are always fascinated. And as you know, the first 2 questions that people ask, is will I get married, or when will I get married, and how many children will I have? People always want to know those 2 things up front. But we find out so much more in the hands because we not only look at the lines. The lines are a major part, but that's not the only part. We look at the shape of the hands, the texture, the nails, the fingers, the length, the size, the coloring, and, the markings on the hand. They tell us a whole myriad of things. And I think for the fact that people can have it done right there, like say if they're at a party or, like say the Renaissance Fair or even a private reading, they take their hands with them and they're always studying their hands after that. They're always looking at their hands. So it's very intriguing for people. Whereas if they get a card reading or, I also do the crystal ball like how you do, they walk away, they don't have that with them.
Yeah, then that's really true too. And I have found, like when I was single before I met my husband, and some guy you're dating finds out that you're a psychic, the first thing they do is stick out their hand. Have you noticed that?
Well, it's true. People do that. The different categories of hands. There's 6 main categories of hands. There's a square hand, a spatulate. A square hand is more of like an earth hand. That would be somebody that's working with their hands a lot. Person with a spatulate hand, and again, just think of a spatula that you use to flip pancakes. That's that kind of shape. That would be a person that would be more adventurous. A person with a conic hand, they may be more thick at the base and thinner at the top. The fingers. Those are people that are in the arts and entertainments. A philosophic hand would be very long and narrow with probably knotty fingers. That person is thinking a lot. A psychic hand is very soft and narrow and very pointed. The energy goes through very easily. And then an elemental hand, which you really would not see very much, that would be a very base hand, and that person is very materialistic and, let's say, brutal. But let me back up. Again, we're not going to draw somebody's personality out of the shape of their hands, and nobody has a pure hand. So the 7th category that we have is a mixed hand. So we'll find different mixtures, like say, that's why for years I really stopped telling I was a palmist for that reason. You almost get smacked in the face because the palm, their hand just comes right up to your face. So I would always, say I do everything else, and then, if they're interested in reading, I give them my card and it'd have palmistry on it. But you have to be really careful, or stand back when you talk to a person and tell them you're a palmist.
You can get hit in the forehead pretty much, huh? Sure, okay, well then tell me something about myself, It's so funny.
It is.
So, what are some of the first clues to a person's personality that are revealed in a palm?
Well, when we do a palm reading, what I do, and what most palmists do, is we're going to look at the hands, the shape of the hands, because there's different shapes, and that will give us an idea. And again, for every positive in the hand, there's a negative, and we can't just take one aspect of the hand and say that's a person's personality or characteristic. I mean, that's having enough information to be dangerous. We have to, so let me back up. Before we even read the hands, is we have to look at the hands, both hands, as a book, and to read both hands as a book, and to read them in a total essence. So
loves in the psychic arts, and that's palmistry.
Oh, I know. I'm so excited about tonight's talk. And actually, it was you that introduced me to palmistry and encouraged me to study it back in the early 90s.
And you really ran with it. I believe you put together
a
workbook,
and like you said, it was your first love. There's something about it that that is a love. And it's just like with anything else that we study, like with the tarot or a lot of the other arts of divination, it's endless what we can learn. And that's not to discourage anybody, but it's just to encourage them that we don't know everything all the time, and it's just something that we can, keep learning as we grow and we progress in our lives.
And so, why do you think people are fascinated by palmistry? Because they could take it with them, or they can always look at their palm, or what has your reactions been when you read people's palms and stuff? They really want to know, don't they?
They really do. People love to have their palms read. You know what? Because it's just connected to them. It's a part of them. I mean, the palm, our hands are like the books of our lives, and everything is written in them, past, present, and probable future. And the lines change as we change because they're the end of the nerve ending.